the nation's oldest press club. His work has earned countless of honors, which includes landing on the 2020 Forbes 30 Under 30 list and being named the 2017 Emerging Journalist of the Year. Welcome. And Raquel Willis, I am so happy to have you on. She is a Black, queer, transgender activist, writer, and speaker dedicated to inspiring and elevating marginalized individuals, particularly transgender women of color. She is currently the executive editor of Out Magazine and the founder of Black Trans Circles. Through the Transgender Law Center in 2018, she was named the Jack Jones Literary Arts Fellow. She's also part of Echoing Ida and National Black Women and Non-Binary Writers Collective. She's a former national organizer for TLC, and in 2018, she was named an Open Society Foundation's Fellow. She launched Black Trans Circles, which we're going to talk about that more in detail, right? A project focused on developing the leadership of Black trans women in the South and Midwest by creating healing justice spaces to work through oppression-based trauma and incubating community organizing efforts to address anti-trans murder and violence and elevating nuanced narratives through a national storytelling campaign. Welcome to the panelists.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so let's get right into it. Let's talk about microaggressions. What have you faced on the job?
So I guess I could start with that. One of the things that I think is important to mention is Brittany read a really great briefing, but I have also been a reporter. I was a television reporter for 12 years, starting in Oklahoma, then going to Washington State, then West Palm Beach, then Baltimore. And then after 12 years as a television reporter, I sort of got tired of the moving all around the country, not spending holidays with my family, and I started working for the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office under Marilyn Mosby, who was the prosecutor who charged the 6 officers in Freddie Gray. And then after that, I went to become a press secretary in Congress before coming here to Barnard Columbia University. So I think that I have certainly experienced a lot of micro aggressions, especially being a Black woman in the newsroom and in political sectors. And, some of those microaggressions that may seem like, for instance, when I was a reporter in Baltimore, and I heard one of the other panelists talk about this, I was a crime reporter. And a lot of times, you as the Black person in the newsroom, you're often sent out to cover Black stories. And even though it may seem like this is great because this is going to be the lead, there is a sense of microaggression in the fact that you are always covering the Black stories because people are not comfortable going into certain neighborhoods or they're not comfortable talking to certain people. And so those are sort of some of the microaggressions that I experienced. And when it comes to working for Congress, I think some of those microaggressions were our issues as Black people, as African Americans, was often looped into other issues. So, it was not a real focus on just African Americans. It became a focus on people of color. They started to sort of loop all of our issues into the same thing and where we were starting to be ignored. So those are just some of the microaggressions that I've experienced just throughout my career.
Go ahead.
Well, I think anybody who's Black that's doing journalism, whether or not they are, working in a newsroom or independent, experience microaggressions just comes with the job. I think for me, what was important is that I have never worked full-time in a media publication or a media company for the sake of the fact that I think that microaggressions, quite frankly, are a distraction and impede upon the work itself. And a lot of vicariously looking at journalists who's been around for decades on end, I'm like, why would you put yourself through it if you don't have to? Which is why I decided to create my own media company and work for myself early on in my career because of the fact that I did not want to go to work and have to, have these exchanges back and forth. And I'm, privileged in that way to be able to have those opportunities to do that because at the end of the day, the microaggressions don't just happen in the newsroom, but happen when you're on the job, on the field, the interviews you're doing, the people you're dealing with, the feedback you get from the comments Like, you can write the same story of your white counterpart or someone else, but because you wrote it, you're gonna get a level of energy on social media. And so for me, it was about controlling the entry of my life and the type of things that I decided that I wanna take in, because I experienced a lot of that. And I also want to extend the conversation, not just in the newsroom, but in this industry, which does not just revolve around the job, but the organizations we join, the spaces we operate, and all of those different microaggressions, and not just on race, but sexual orientation and gender and even age. Going places and being in the room and people saying, wait your turn, but you're the one who came up with the idea. Or, I've seen women that I've worked with where they've said the same thing and the man will steal the idea and say the same thing in a remixed version, and everyone gives them a pat on the back. Or, being in certain spaces where people say very microaggressive, subtly homophobic things, or like, that they coddle with, that's my opinion, or those are my views. And all of these types of subtle things that jab at and distract at the work. And to me, I don't usually, the word microaggressions work, but I call them distractions because it has nothing to do with the actual work. And so newsrooms sometimes I feel like, why I really am anti-newsroom, like I do a lot of work from home in my own co-working spaces, trying to get the hell out of there, is because oftentimes when you're in these concentrated spaces, ego, ignorance, and all types of other isms exist in a way that impede upon the progress of the work that all journalists have to deal with. Because when you're in a room, you're dealing with someone talking about what kind of hairstyle you have, or what you wore, or how you talk, or how you sound. Or if you go to an industry event and people look at your name tag and say, well, what is Ernest B. Empire? Because it doesn't say New York Times. These are all microaggressions that distract and impede upon the progress. And it's happening whether it's in our own communities, whether it's on our own networks, how we talk about work, how we talk about who works and how much they work and what defines success. All of those things are distractions that impede upon the process. And so for me, it's really been important about guarding my space and really, preserving my energy and reclaiming my time, because you will find so much of your energy being wasted, right? We come here to do a job, to get a check, to tell stories, make an impact. And a lot of the stuff that we are getting frustrated about have nothing to do with that. And so for me, I love the fact that the most thing I'm anxious about is a big long form piece I have coming out tomorrow. Not about what someone in office said about me, because I'm not in that office. And I like being self-employed because I have HR problems. I'm my own HR person. How did you do that, Ernest?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. You should do better. But it's all of these things that we deal with because of quote-unquote microaggressions. So, whether or not you're self-employed or you work with groups, find ways to separate yourself from that mess. And we all know what it is. And remembering why we're here, why we do this work.
I remember my boss, being in close spaces with my boss and him asking questions like, why don't your curls lay flat and things like that. But that was from the manager, not really coworkers. But Raquel, you experienced, people actually saying things to you in the newsroom, right?
Yeah. So for me, just a little background for me, I went to the University of Georgia, that's where I got my journalism degree. And I left college having to kind of go in the closet about my trans experience. Just because I needed to survive, I needed money, I wanted to be in the industry, get the experience that I needed to probably have a better job down the road. And so that meant I kind of dealt with kind of that baseline misogyny. So like I was read as like a cisgender woman, a woman of not of a trans experience. And so I dealt with, older white men in small town Georgia making comments about my body, making comments about how I looked, thinking that they were like compliments, but it's like I came to do my job. I came to report. I didn't come here to be oogled and deal with all of those kind of microaggressions. But the interesting thing is I also saw kind of the flip side, and because I wasn't out, I was very attuned to how they would talk about trans people. People throwing out slurs like tranny and using incorrect language and thinking it was okay. People saying really kind of disgusting things about gay people and other LGBTQ folks. And I hated how that felt. being in the closet, obviously not being my full self, but I also hated not being able to advocate for other folks because I was in fear of my own situation. And I think we all have dealt with that, right? Like, I'm sure many of you have heard, you know, misogynistic things or homophobic or transphobic things and felt like you couldn't say anything because it might jeopardize your trajectory, right? Or people might be like, oh, well, why are you advocating for these people? Is that your experience? You know, and that's a very real thing. The other thing I'll say is that I've also dealt with kind of in that particular job being told I could only cover certain stories. So because I was a woman, I could only cover human interest pieces, you know, kind of what they consider the more fluffy pieces. I couldn't do the like hard-hitting things. I couldn't talk to the politicians, talk to the governor if he came into town, all that kind of stuff. That was something I had to earn my stripes for. And so I hate that kind of like hierarchy that we often deal with in the newsroom of like who can take certain stories, who can't, and it's not always based on actual skill level, it's based on who's been there the longest, right? Or who has that connection. And really we need to be looking out for each other. We need to be like, oh, this could be a growing moment for this reporter on our team. Let them do this, because I've interviewed this person before, or I've been, you know, in this space or had these conversations. So I also think we have to advocate for each other in that way. And then for me now, it's like, I often feel like because I'm known now as an openly transgender person that the extent of my expertise is my experience. And that people only want to hear from me if I'm talking about trans issues or talking about LGBTQ issues. So it's that weird thing now where it's like before I couldn't cover things because I was a woman, and now it's like, oh, well, we just want to hear certain things from you. Right. We're not going to reach out to you outside of a Pride Month project or outside of like a Visibility Day or something like that. And it's like, no, I actually have things to say. You know, I have things I want to say about Super Tuesday, about the election, you know, about how y'all talking about Black Southern voters, right? Because I'm a Black person from the South. That's my family. So I don't like those things as well, right? Like, I think we've got to give people the space to talk about things and write about things and report on things that we don't assume isn't in their skill level, if that makes sense.
I want to add something to what Raquel just said that I think is very important, is that sometimes people do try to put us in a box because of our sexual orientation, our race, or gender, whatever. And I can say that, you know, as a political commentator, most of my commentary, I go on Fox News. No, I'm not a Trump supporter, so don't go crazy. But most of the time when I go on Fox News, I decline a lot of shows because I am not going to be the spokesperson just for Black issues. I want to come in and I want to talk about North Korea. I want to come in and, just like Raquel said, talk about the elections. And I think that there's a certain level, there are some times where we have to make those decisions for ourselves, because sometimes we go into these spaces and we're like, okay, let me just keep doing this, because in some cases we're chasing the bag or we want clout or whatever it is. But at times you have to remind these people that you are more than just, you know, transgender. You are more than just Black. You are more than just a woman, that you can talk about other issues. And it's important for you to have that confidence to say, no, like I won't do Laura Ingraham show at all. Because every time it is about race. It is pitting two Black people, Candace Owens typically, is who they want you to go on with, is pitting two Black people, two Black women together. And I'm not going to sell or serve that kind of energy, and I'm not going to do the head roll and all that, because that's exactly what they want me to do. So I'm like, no, let me know when you want to talk about North Korea. Let me know when you want to talk about the abortion bill in Alabama. Call me then. And that's how I sort of define myself outside of just being a Black person in those spaces.
Well, I just want to not flip this all around, but just put this in perspective in a different way. So for me, I think, you know, with the exception of the pitting in the heads, right, about the Candace Owens stuff, right, TV crap. But more so about agency, that I feel like as a freelance writer, I get to control the beats. I get to control what I want to write and what I want to pitch. And even with freelancers, we pick our stories and things. I kind of feel like if I want to just talk about Black people and those things, and they come from that place all day, that's what I'm going to do. And I think that it's kind of weird sometimes that for Black people, there's this cognizant notion of we have to show all these different multitudes and levels of ourselves, or say we're not just this. When white people don't do that at all. They can write about white things. I wanted to say this to clarify. I'm saying that the agency to choose that. And that some people, if you're being pigeonholed and you don't have the choice, that's a problem. But also to flip it on reverse to say some people that I do feel is that I'm in situations, and I do see some young journalists in situations where they're being pushed not to do those things to show their versatility. And so I want to show and express the importance of agency and balance. Because in certain cases, in the mainstream level, sure, like there's a lot of people that are Black that are being treated as the expert in their room where it's predominantly white setting. But there are also journalists that I know, including myself, who do want to cover and go deeper dive in a particular segment or a part of their community or identity. And that's what they love to do, and that's what they want to do. And they're being limited in that because there's this negative connotation that if you only cover this as a Black person, you only cover Black issues all the time, then somehow that's not as successful, or that's not as important, or you're limiting yourself in that way. So I think it's about agency and how you choose to do it. When I was the LGBTQ editor for Philadelphia Magazine, before I transitioned to writer at large, I wanted to only cover LGBT stories, and that was my way that I got into the publication. And all of the people that came around me was like, why do you want to just cover LGBT? You're more than, you're this, that, and third. But to be quite honest, I'm intersectional. I didn't see the stories as only LGBTQ stories. I saw them as stories that dealt with people and the intersection of race and society. And that if you tell these stories, regardless of the identities of the people as a source, those stories will touch people in different ways and connect with them in different ways. And as journalists who, some of you all have beats, there's ways that you can insert your identity or discuss these things without having to change it. Like when we say Black stories or Black this, I mean, only in the confines of like television where you're being specifically asked about your experience and that is being used or weaponized or exploited. Outside of that, on a reporter lens, telling these stories in general are just really good stories that are necessary. And if you're the best person to do it and you're in that position, do it. Because I don't want to just say, okay, I don't want to do this Black story because I'm tired of doing Black stories, but then we give it to Becky and Chad and they ruin it. And then I get a phone call from my people and they're like, so you just gonna let them tell that story and y'all here? So I sometimes have found it necessary, and also my own personal civic duty, to be like, look, before y'all jack this up, let me go ahead and step up and do it. And again, it shouldn't always have to be that way, but I do think it's really important to just emphasize the effect of agency on both sides of that.
You know, in my career, I worked in Arkansas, Tennessee, Michigan. I dealt with discrimination. I could feel race, right? But I never really felt race in the newsroom until I was in my hometown in St. Louis, Missouri. And I'm like hustling, like just trying to like be the best reporter I can. And then we find out about this 18-year-old kid, Mike Brown shot and killed in Ferguson. Called myself into work, started reporting, and wouldn't stop reporting. And my mentors told me, like, don't stop until they take you off the story. And I didn't realize that was like a thing. Like, if you can prove something is a news story, then you get to tell it, right? And so when I realized that even though you could prove something was a news story, but sometimes your producers don't want to throw oil on the fire, or sometimes they don't want to, share the story, they're not going to do it. And I remember I struggled with that, because I'm like, we can provide so much understanding to the people that need it. And I remember one of the older Black news anchors at the shop, and she finally just pulled me aside and she said, I'm sorry that I wasn't there for you. And I'm like, I thought you guys had already fought this battle, like my mom and you, the generation before. And she was like, did you think your roots were blonde? And I'm like, well, yeah, kind of, sort of, I guess so. She's like, girl, you Black. And that was the first real maybe we're not doing this because I am colored. Okay. So I've worked in all these stations up until then, and I'm like, I would love to work in a newsroom with none but Black people, right? And that's Jackson, Mississippi. You know, like the town, it's so predominantly black, and there's so many black people in the news station, and here I am still pitching these stories about race, and we're not telling them. And it is driving me insane. And finally, we got bought out by Nexstar. Nexstar did a Black History special. And I got to interview the first black anchor at WJTV in the 70s. And she had to straighten her natural hair so they could fit on the screen. And I remember thinking to myself, like, is that why we're straightening our hair now? Because she straightened her hair in 1970 something? And so that's one of the reasons why I stopped straightening my hair. What's your story? What prompted you?
With my natural hair. So when I was a reporter in West Palm Beach, Florida, I think it was 2009 to 2012. For many years, I had always worn wigs and weave to fit what was thought to be the standard professional look to be a television reporter. And I started doing that. Sorry. That's okay. I started doing that because my first job, I was an editor in Lexington, Kentucky at WLEX 18 after graduating. And I was an editor and I wanted to be a reporter. So I was editing and I wanted to be a reporter. Photographers worked with me to create a tape and I wasn't getting any jobs. And at the time my hair was relaxed. And so a black female anchor told me that I needed to get extensions and make it longer and more Eurocentric, okay? So I did, and I landed a job. My first job was in Oklahoma. But for years I was wearing wigs, weave, and whatever, and I just got tired of it. And then one day I just decided I'm gonna cut off my hair and go natural. So my hair went from like this lace front black wig to like this short. And I told my news director, basically how it happened is a producer heard me on the phone talking to my friend. I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna cut off. I'm just gonna go natural. And she was white, and she said, what's going natural or whatever? I'm like, well, it's not really going natural. I'm just returning my hair to its natural state or whatever. And she said, oh, that would be great. You know, you should do a story on it. And I shot the story. I wrote it. I edited it. I did all of it. And it went viral to where I ended up in Essence. And from then on, I always vowed that I would always wear my hair natural. I mean, sometimes I wear locks or sometimes I'll do braids, but that I was not going to straighten my hair anymore to be on television. I actually try to make it bigger, especially when I go on Fox. So.
I think that you, go ahead, give her a round of applause, absolutely. If you guys look at this video that I'm about to play, it's from 2010. Okay, so this is somebody that I remember when I was on TV as having made the switch. And I just want you guys to take a look at the story because I think she is
I haven't noticed by now, you probably will.
I love the anchor intro, by the way, as you probably noticed by now.
We didn't notice.
Soon, a new trend in the way black women are styling their hair.
But it's not just about a new look. In a story you'll see only on 5, News Channel 5's Rochelle Ritchie shows us it's a way of redefining years of beauty and having a healthier lifestyle by going au natural.
It's a $9 billion industry. From hair relaxers to extensions and now the popular lace front wig, black women are the biggest target for hair companies, known to spend large amounts of cash on their hair, no matter how much the economy flips.
A stylist I used to go to, he said, I am not worried at all because black women always will spend money on their hair.
Hair relaxers promise to take the kink of black hair and make it bone straight. And whether they are glued in or sewn in, hair extensions or weave give black women the shine and length they want, while wigs make it easier to do all three in less than 5 minutes.
From an Afro-American woman who lost from a chemical burn from the hair relaxant.
Dr. Larry Shapiro, a dermatologist in Delray Beach, has also been doing hair transplants for more than 20 years. He says all this manipulation black women do to their hair is causing it to fall out.
It's going to pull your hair out and you're going to have permanent hair loss.
I see it all the time in my practice.
Most Black women know the unpublished rules to follow before getting a relaxer.
There's a lot of rules.
And what happens when you scratch?
It burns, you burn, you can get scabs in your head. It's like you want to wash it out right away. Like it can be extreme, like some people cry.
And traction alopecia can be a result of braiding and wearing extensions for a long period of time, causing the hairline to eventually disappear. But despite the harmful health effects, those images of straight, long hair have taken a toll on young Black girls like 6-year-old Gianna Louisma.
This is my tennis ball.
Gianna is all smiles while playing at home, but her mother Johanna says it's a different story when she goes to school.
She would voice to me that her friends would say bad things about her hair.
Johanna says because young Black girls like her daughter have been conditioned to believe beauty is having long, straight hair, they develop insecurities as youngsters.
She wanted that straight, flowy hair. She wanted hair like her friends, and then she also mentioned that she wanted hair like mine.
Johanna says she's been getting her hair relaxed for over 10 years, but never thought her hair habits would affect her daughter so deeply.
And I try to reassure her that her hair was beautiful, first and foremost, and that she had hair like her mommy and daddy.
But it was obvious Gianna's hair was not like her mother's. After seeing her first grader being teased on the playground and watching her insecurity build, Johanna decided to take a big step.
One day after school, I picked her up, went to the barber, and chopped it off. And she was there to witness it, and she loved it. She was like, oh my gosh, Mommy, you look so beautiful. You have hair like me.
And this is where the story hits home for me. When I started in TV, I was told I needed to get extensions. So I did and began to almost immediately move up the TV ladder. And for 6 years, I faithfully wore extensions and wigs. But like these women, I was tired of the damage being done to my real hair. It grew, but was weak from all of the pulling of the extensions, and I began to lose it. So after years of manipulation, I took the brave step of going natural.
I can't believe I'm gonna cut my hair off. Oh my God. How much are we gonna have to cut?
But I did it, and it's a big change for the women who take this path. Peter Gay Watson says while she feared the stereotypes of going natural, she let go and also made the drastic change.
I'm seeing myself for the first time ever in my life.
I really don't care about what people think. Get used to it, because this is how it's going to be from now on.
Since cutting off her hair, Johanna says her daughter has a new sense of pride.
Okay, I'm going to stop it here. The reason why I thought it was so cool to show that because
And watching mommy's hair grow like hers.
I did it for my daughter. It makes me feel good inside.
I love my natural hair. It's like my mom's and it's beautiful.
So here it is, a natural me, happy and free, and this is how you will see me reporting from now on. I can tell you, I feel so great right now. I feel lighter. Let me tell you, you look great, Michelle. Thank you.
Beautiful. You have a beautiful
Thank you.
face, and you see your whole face now, and I think you look fantastic.
Thank you. Thank
Took
you
a couple
very
of years
much.
off you too.
Don't you take
I do. And you know, one of the professional, and that was my biggest concern when doing this story. But
so the reason why I want to go ahead and show that, because sometimes we think that if we make a big step like that would be the end of our career, and that that would be over, but that certainly was not over for you. Your career has not been over for you. Tell me how you've gone forward from this.
So the one thing about that story is, the nice thing about that is that I was in a space where I was allowed to do that, because sometimes you're in a space where you don't have a choice, on what you're covering, and you're just kind of handed your stories and they deny your pitches or whatever. But this was the first time that I felt like I was able to tell a story that I owned, that it made me feel good. But my experience since then was, I didn't know what was going to happen. I had an agent, and when I sent her the video and showed her what I did, she was like, okay, let's see what happens. And so I said, okay, because I'm not changing it. I'm not straightening my hair. And I ended up going from there to Baltimore to WJZ, Channel 13. That's the station that Oprah and Gail worked at. And that is where Oprah was told that she needed to straighten her hair. And we all know what happened. It fell out when she burned it. and I ended up going to that exact same station with my natural hair. And the way that the people in Baltimore, I love Baltimore, the way the people in Baltimore embraced me was, you know, so welcoming. Like, my hair sometimes would be blowing this way and that way, but, you know, I was never told that I had to change it or do anything with it. And then from going from there to the state's attorney's office to Congress and so forth, like, it has not had a negative impact. It's actually empowered me. It actually makes me more confident to walk into spaces where you know, you might not be as welcome, because for me to walk in there with this, that's a statement. That's a statement that I'm confident in who I am, and that I'm not trying to hide my blackness or hide anything about myself. But no, it hasn't had an impact on my career, but I know it has in other spaces. And I know we have like the Crown Act that is out there. And I wrote an op-ed for BET that, you know, basically said, you know, stop looking at my hair and read my resume. Because that's where my skills are. My skills are not up here. My skills are, you know, in my work. And so, you know, I just try to be a bit of a voice when it comes to these sort of issues, because, you know, in certain spaces you just don't, in certain newsrooms, you just don't get a choice, right? But now that I'm out of that space and I have the freedom to kind of say and write whatever I want, that's what I've been doing.
Ernest built a whole empire. I mean, talk about how you've been able to build your confidence and navigate the discrimination that you face.
Well, the confidence was already there. But I think for me, it's just been about, you know, I don't have hair, but I do think one of the things that I think is happening in this industry is the elitism that comes in the industry for people who are freelancers versus people who work in broadcast or print or whatever. And I'm seeing this trend happen a lot for the hustlers out there like myself who don't want to work in the major newsrooms. And the conversations about, oh, senior positions and manager positions, that's cool too, but that's not what I want to do. And there's a lot of young black journalists out here, and even people who are middle-aged and senior who are transitioning careers and realizing that those doors and a revolving door is changing. And so for me, the biggest discrimination I've faced is, yes, I've dealt with the racism and homophobia, but, you know, being black and gay, whether I was in journalism or flipping burgers, it would be the same experience to a certain degree. But what I'm looking at as unique to this industry specifically is the fact that we're in an industry that, whether you have a master's in journalism or not, whether you are, you know, someone who, you know, has 1,000 certifications or not, there's an entryway to get into the industry with skills and wit and grit. And I'm seeing a lot of young people specifically get stifled by the ageism that is happening towards us in this industry and in these organizations. And I think one of the problems starts with the fact that I have had to say this, and I say this all the time, is that seniority is not authority. And I say that because of the fact that as someone who's 28 years old, I have achieved my own financial support for not only myself, but to help inspire and encourage and bring other people in to learn entrepreneurship journalism, which is lacking, especially for black journalists. We're teaching black journalists to keep trying to compete with the Joneses with the grass is greener, when maybe that's not what we want. And for me, I fought so hard against that. When I started off, I went to Ivy School, I went to the University of Pennsylvania. And when I graduated, you know, I was supposed to go straight there. I got accepted to this school. I rejected that because someone said you need to save some money and you don't need to go here for 2 years in order to be that journalist I am today. And I freelanced at the free paper called Metro, which I know there's Metro New York. There was a Metro Philly. And people judged me. They said, why are you working for a free paper? You have an Ivy degree, you should be here. And I said, it wasn't about the titles, it's about what they were allowing me to do. And I was able to report on politics, community affairs, and other issues that some of my friends who were at the Forbes and the BuzzFeeds and the big places, they were limited in what they could write about, what stories they can tell. And I began to realize that around me, we were pushing industries and logos and banners and companies and corporations and positions and salaries, but we weren't actually reminding people about the freedom Because that's really what Black journalists want. That was what Chuck Stone and Asa Warren, all these people that inspired me, was fighting for in their newsrooms, was the freedom to tell the stories they wanted to tell, the opportunity to navigate that. And there were no age caps at that. And when I came into that position at Metro, I became the youngest person in the country to have a syndicated column. I was 24 with a national column called The Earnest Opinion. And I was sharing issues and things. And there were people before me that said, no, you can't do that because, you have to be, to be a columnist, you have to be a certain, you have to be in a business for this many years. But I was like, but my expertise and my experience and the stories I want to tell, there's no cap on that. And we set so many caps on young people, specifically in this industry, on what they can do. When we look at the trends of the market, we're outpacing the market. If you look at these newsrooms, they're getting a lot younger. And even younger people don't want to work for those companies. And as someone who is now in Philadelphia, which is a top 5 market, I'm going out, I'm talking to young Black people about journalism, and they're saying, I don't feel like I'm a journalist. Like, you are, but they say, no, because I was told to be a journalist, I have to work at a major newsroom. I gotta have, a boss. I have to be vetted, and that's not true. And so one of the experiences I fought against, and some of the, microaggressions I see a lot of young Black journalists fight against, is feeling like they belong in an industry where their talent is calling, that they have the talent, that they have the ability to do these great things, but they're not getting a seat at the table. They're not being brought to leadership. They're not being taught about promotions. They're not being encouraged to sit at the table, even if they don't belong to a major media company. And we have to stop that. We have to stop that. And we have to also encourage people to try new, different avenues. We need to encourage people to create their own publications and blogs. We're asking and begging newsrooms, oh, you need to do more stories about Black people. They may never do as many stories as we want them to. But let's look at the ones who do. Let's support the ones that do. Let's support the media companies and the journalists and the freelancers and folks that do those stories and do them well. And I believe that. So I think that's what we need to start encouraging.
Raquel, tell us how you found your way to where you are now. I mean, thinking about it in the beginning, a small newspaper reporter, how did you gain your confidence? How did you get to where you are?
Well, I knew I wanted to get out of small town Georgia. So that was one thing. And so I actually took a job as a media publisher for something completely unrelated to anything I ever wanted to write about. I worked at howstuffworks.com. And so it is a like science-based kind of, that kind of space, very geeky and nerdy, which is fine, but it was also just very white. But it got me into Atlanta. It got me into community. Like I finally had Black LGBTQ community, and I was inspired by what was happening on the ground. Like the movement for Black Lives was popping off. I met folks who were doing organizing work, specifically around sex work and people being profiled as sex workers and arrested. A lot of trans women were being arrested in Atlanta. And so I actually decided I wanted to segue into more organizing because I felt like these were the stories I wanted to tell, but I didn't actually know the language. I wasn't actually in community with folks. And I think that is often an issue when we talk about the stories we want to tell and the stories we want to share. Is you need to be in community with these folks a lot of times. You can't get caught up in that idea of oh, well, I won't be objective anymore if I'm too in the thick of it. But it's police brutality is our lives, right?
How do I stand in front of a Black Lives Matter sign and pretend like my own life doesn't matter?
Exactly, yeah. So it was important for me to kind of segue into nonprofit communications. So I was still kind of doing the media work, doing the storytelling work, and doing more freelance work. And so that got me, the opportunity to actually write about things I cared about, be open about who I was. But I'll be honest, it took me a few months, even after moving to Atlanta, to actually be open about my trans identity. I went into that job at How Stuff Works, still in the closet, and then I remember there was this young trans girl who died by suicide. Her name was Leila Alcorn. I believe she was like 16 or 17. And she wrote this suicide letter. And it was one of those times, it was like one of the only times we've seen like someone write a suicide letter and then they set it to be published on Tumblr after they committed the act. And it went kind of like viral in the LGBTQ community. And I remember reading that letter, because at that time I was also on Tumblr. And I remember reading that letter and just my heart broke. Like, I was just like bawling. And I just remember her saying how she didn't see a future. She was like, there aren't any like trans role models out there really. And I was like, well, I work in media and I'm not speaking up and I'm not being my full self. And so how am I complicit in her erasure, you know? And so I made this like YouTube video. I was not a YouTuber at all. It was like really like, you know, blurry, looked like Vaseline was on the lens and all that stuff. But,
like 8% of YouTube.
Right, especially back then before everyone had these budgets and stuff. But I just kind of spoke from the heart and spoke about, you know, I was like ugly crying, but I just spoke about, you know, how difficult it is for trans folks out here and how nobody's telling our stories. You know, we were just seeing people like Laverne Cox on Orange is the New Black, and Janet Mock was starting to ascend, but it still was like, you know, kind of a no man's land for us. And so after I did that, then I got called to do a BBC interview. That was like a global interview. And I had to talk to my coworkers and talk to my employer because I was like, look, I'm about to come out, so like, I hope that's okay. Like, I want to know if I'm gonna still have a job tomorrow. And they actually encouraged it and thought it was a great thing. And so that kind of was like my segue into being more outspoken about my own experience, but also being dedicated to elevating the experiences of my community.
I know we talked about before we started just about being human and being who it is that we were created to be. In Mississippi, when I was there, you know, I really, really struggled with not being able to tell our stories. And it got to a point where, you know, I was facing discrimination just as a young Black mother, you know, to the point where my mentors were like, Brittany, you gotta stick up for yourself. So what I did to stick up for myself, my way of navigating, was I filed an internal complaint with my company about everything that I was facing, everything that I struggled with at my news station. And we went through that a couple of times, and I was ignored. And so my next step is, because, I mean, there were so many great stories in Mississippi that literally we shut down. And I thought that people needed to know about these stories that we could not tell in Mississippi. So I ended up taking those internal complaints to the EEOC, and the government, you know, was forced to investigate what these complaints were by this, you know, person at the news station. The EEOC investigated my complaints, and then they gave me the right to sue. And so now I have the ability to sue Nexstar, which is the largest employer of TV news stations in the United States. So these are just our different ways of navigating discrimination in TV. Now we can open up, I guess, to questions. If anybody has a question.
I want to say one quick little thing. It's also important too, and how we can all support each other, is that when we see or hear about problematic publications or news stations that have a history, repeated history of discriminating, not paying writers, don't go work for those places. Mm-hmm. And don't encourage and don't be silent to the fact that when you see places that either become a hashtag of those, or a place that don't pay, that don't pay people or do people wrong or do a lot of discriminatory things, and you hear these changes, don't be complicit with that, you know? We just really gotta stand up for each other, especially for Black people, because they love to weaponize us against each other. They like to tokenize us, take one here, move one here, replace one Black person with the other Black person, and we think that's success and that's Black excellence, but in reality, that's how they break us sometimes in this industry. So we really got to stand together. We see someone in our tribe that's being discriminated, or a couple of people that's getting pushed out somewhere. we gotta be as a strong collective to really, unify and really take a stand against that kind of stuff.
And I just want to say really quick before you go to questions, I think Ernest makes a really, really great point. And I think that we have to, I'm old enough, I'm 38, so I'm old enough to remember when there was Teen Summit on BET, and when there was BET News and all of those things. And those were times where we had a place to tell our stories and discuss our issues. And now we really don't have that. I mean, if you look at some of the major networks, the more liberal networks, Black women are only on the weekend, on the desk.
Or Monday.
Right. Why don't we have a Black woman in particular throughout the entire week? Our stories are not being heard because we don't have a place to really tell them on that mainstream front. And so thanks to people like Ernest and other people that are out there starting their own sort of publications and their blogs, our stories are getting heard. But I think that it's important for us to support each other when we do start such publications. And I think it's in Tallahassee they have this Black news channel that just started. I mean, we need to be following them on Twitter. We need to be supporting them. We need to be sending them story ideas in our community so that we have a place that was like the Teen Summit and the BET News back in the day when it was really for us to have a place for that. But I just wanted to add on that's just extremely important to support each other, because I don't know how many of you plan or want to work for like in a major newsroom or kind of climb the ladder, but the reality is that sometimes you're going to be assigned stories. Sometimes you're going to pitch stories, but guess what? If there's a shooting, if there's a fire, if there's something, there's no space for it. Exactly. So especially in New York City, I mean, you can pitch really great stories, but you're in New York. Like, it's 50 million things going on. And so unfortunately your story gets pushed to the back burner. But one thing you can always try to do is see if, when you look at these ABC or NBC or any of these, ask them if they know of, like NBC has NBC Black, right? So maybe you can submit an op-ed to share your story, and you get to share it in your voice without a producer coming in and chopping up your sound bites and moving things around. So that's what I've tried to do more of, is doing like op-eds that really focus on Black issues and putting them to Blavity and The Root in different places to kind of share, the issues that we're facing. But we have to support each other and definitely support BNC. So, Black News Channel.
All right, let's do questions. Yes.
Well, I was going to start out. Can we just first and foremost thank them for what they offer today? I'm extremely grateful for each and every one of you being brave and open enough to come and share your stories here today. And I want to open the questions up. And actually, it's not as much a question, but a suggestion from you all. What would you encourage us to do, folks who hold positions of leadership, folks who have platforms that they're starting or that have any way, shape, or form opportunities to open doors and really push hard conversations? What would you encourage us to do in those spaces where actually the discrimination that we're facing or that we're seeing play out is coming from us? It's within our community, it's conversations that we see happening behind closed doors, happening amongst us, that are actually keeping us in these spaces of not being able to grow, progress, and take care of one another. Specifically issues around sexual violence, LGBTQ and trans issues, right? Like, we know Black and brown communities are still historically deeply homophobic and transphobic, right? And we have histories of not wanting to bring the stories of sexual violence to the forefront, and all of these horrible things that happen across all communities as impacted people. Those conversations are even harder. So in spaces where some of us might be navigating and trying to do some of that work and being advocates, what would you offer us? What can we do better to move us forward?
Call that shit out. Call it out. I would say call it out. Unless there's an intervention where you have a group of people internally and you can have that conversation privately, I would just say call it out. Because sometimes I've learned that in these type of experiences, when you witness these things, like when you look at the stuff that happened with Snoop Dogg and Gayle King, until people speak up, because the people the opposition, the negativity, the bigotry is always loud when these things happen. And I'm always wondering, like, when people say, oh, there's good cops, but when the bad stuff happened, where are the good cops? Like, where are the good cops saying I'm good and this is wrong? And when we see situations where we see sexual violence and stories happen to Black women and misogyny, and there's like, I'm a good man, well, where are the good men at when that stuff is happening? Like, silence is violence. And so when you say you're an ally, when you say you support women, when you say you support the LGBTQ community, it's about the people who are quote unquote good people. That's your moment when you're supposed to be stepping out and speaking out against something. It's not just about being there in the good times, like showing up to Pride, wearing a rainbow shirt, or when there's a women's parade, going out and supporting the good times. It's really showing up in the controversy and weighing in and saying, hey, that's not cool. Hey, that's wrong. And being very outspoken about that as well. I would say that's for everybody. I think I do that to myself. Like when I see things I don't agree with and it's making me upset, I'll say, did I say anything to anyone else? Did I correct the brother at the barbershop when they was talking about Gayle King? Did I correct other people in spaces I was at? Or was I just keeping these things to myself? Or was I in the DMs of those women saying, I feel so bad, it's gonna be okay? No, we gotta get out of the DMs, we gotta get out of the text message inboxes and post that stuff and say that stuff out loud so that people don't have the perception that that defines the Black community. Because in my opinion, the Black community is not historically transphobic or homophobic, no higher than white people. They have the Southern Baptist Church, they have all their crazy groups and hate groups too. Legislation and law too. But the difference between us, I think, is that because we don't have so many good people in our community speaking up and out loud, then the perception is that this is what the community thinks, when I don't believe that's the case.
I think also the majority has also sold us that idea too, that Black people are transphobic, I think, or homophobic or whatever. I think that they have done that to sell this sort of image and take responsibility away from how they and their policies and their practices have birthed transphobic or homophobic and racist and sexist issues. And so I think it's very, very important to call it out, but I also think it's important on how you call it out. And I think sometimes when you sort of dive into data and you dive into facts and you dig into the research of those communities and you share that with our community, make it a learning experience. Because unfortunately, not everybody's gonna like us. Not everyone's gonna like what we do. But at least if we can open up a space that is non-judgmental, even though they're judging us, if we can open up a space that's non-judgmental and use it as an educational opportunity, I think that's the best thing that we can possibly do. But that narrative is really, a lot of narratives about our people has been sold to us by them.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, but but I'll keep it kind of cute. For me, there is a major need for political education for everyone. We need to talk about how expansive gender is. We need to talk about how expansive sexuality is. We have the same basic circular arguments about, oh, is it a problem if I date a bisexual? Oh, should I date trans people? Should we call out this predator? We have these same circular toxic arguments and conversations, especially online. And I feel like we aren't actually having them in person enough. We aren't actually talking with our mamas and our papas and our boyfriends and girlfriends and all these folks about these issues. It can't just be isolated to your little bubble online. You gotta let that stuff spill over, let that advocacy spill over, exactly what Ernest was saying, into real life. I think the other thing is that we don't call out respectability enough. Especially in Black publications, especially in Black institutions, period. I've been to NABJ events, especially years ago. I did not feel comfortable as a Black trans woman. I've been up for jobs at Black publications that were like, well, you can't talk about all that LGBTQ stuff. You got to talk about the race stuff. Look, I think about Essence Magazine, right? As much as I love a lot of folks who work there, but they've never had a Black trans woman on their cover. There's never been a push for that, when we know there's different Black trans folks who are high profile now. Laverne Cox, Janet Mock, India Moore, all of these folks could be on the cover, right?
But your Essence Most Woke twice.
Right, and so that's the other thing, right? Is the way that activism and organizing has been so commodified.
Yes.
And so people will have their little moment where they're like, let's celebrate wokeness. But it's like, you clearly have not infused that into the fiber of your publication or your being.
You don't even pay your writers.
I mean, that's also a thing. And I will say, I had a difficult time. I actually recently left Out magazine. But I had a difficult time. I was the first Black trans woman in a leadership position at that publication, and particularly, I think, the first, although we never always know, right? Because there are a lot of people who've never been open about their identities, but probably the first to be in a leadership position at a print publication. And it was difficult for me because while it was like a great post and it was like historic in all these ways, you know, we quickly learned that there was a lot of shady things behind the scenes of, we did have a hashtag that was like out, you know, and so I spoke when I could, but a lot of kind of my difficulty in speaking out was like, I just didn't know to the extent the issues were, and we actually advocated a lot on the inside, always. Like, we would withhold production, you know, until they paid certain vendors. We did all that we could on the inside, but we knew we needed to stay at least to get some of that course corrected. So my advice is, like, for any publication, please do your like deep research on it, figure out what's going on before you get into a situation where you're combating your morals to survive in your career. And then the other thing I'll say is, you know, part of the reason I recently left Out magazine, it literally was like 3 weeks ago, was because they had laid off a lot of folks, and they laid off my boss, and then they offered me the editor-in-chief position. And so that would have obviously been an even higher position, an even historic moment. But I also was kind of hit with, oh, well, you need to take a 40% pay cut. And so I think about the ways that, like, they will run publications into the ground, run companies and organizations into the ground. And then it's like, okay, well, but now we can finally have all this diversity that should have had all along because we're in the gutter. And we want to put that onto you and onto your integrity and your stature and your reputation. And so, you know, I think going back to the agency piece that just cuts across everything, you can say no, you have the power to say no. I understand needing to survive, so if you need to do that, but always know that you have a choice in whatever decision you make in your career.
And don't always come as the reaction or response. I think that's what we were talking about too, is it's like, you know, what happened, I was unfortunate because it's like one of those situations where every time they want to push Black people to the front is because something that happened behind closed doors. Or where the reaction was someone got fired or laid off, or some scandal happens and they say, oh, we got to get a Black person. Or like, Biden becomes a nomination and now we got to find that Black woman to be the VP because it's not going to make them look good. We always find like chess pieces and consolation prizes for Black people in media to be the supplement to some white person's mistake. And I think that we got to recognize when we're being weaponized and being moved in that kind of way to be like, oh, I'm not going to be the answer to your messed up problem.
All right, we only have time for 2 more questions, so I'm going to come over here, and then we have Tommy Davis after.
Well, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you, NABJ, for having us again. This conversation is much needed. I have this with myself a lot, and thank you to the panelists for being so open in the conversation. My question would be, when you're a part of a community that's marginalized, when you're a part of a community that's considered to be the minority, there's a lot of things that they use to invoke reaction from us in order to maybe trend or sell something or to have those conversations to get that clickbait. So how do you pick and choose, or do you pick and choose when you're actually advocating online or in these digital spaces, and what needs to be called out and what you feel may be reactionary? You're doing it for a reason.
So I'll make this quick because I know we're starting to run out of time, but I remember I was on Twitter and I saw this story about a woman who had lost her job. I can't remember where she lived. Let's just say she lived in Michigan, okay? She lived in Michigan, and the story was about how the factory closed and she lost her job and she had 11 kids. And the headline, I remember, it was a station in Atlanta that ran the story as well. It said something like, mother of 11 children out of work. But when you read the article, it had nothing to do with her having 11 kids. It was about the fact that this factory had closed in town and thousands of people were laid off. They just happened to speak to her and had to bring up the fact that she had 11 children, even though that that wasn't part of the story. So if you ever look at my Twitter account, I go in on people, like journalists and all, because I've done the job. And I tweeted after the station, and I'm like, this is kind of like you're exploiting this Black woman because she has 11 children. The story was not about that. It was about the factory closing. And I think the more that we can do that to expose the fact that these stations that seem to want to, they care so much about our issues and so much about us will actually exploit us for clickbait. That was a clickbait because it was like, a mom with 11 kids, let me see it. And that's what journalism actually does. That's what social media is about, is getting you to go and click. But when it comes to us, we have to call it out every time. Because all you saw after that was like, oh my gosh, she should have had all those children, and then it became about that as opposed to she was a working mother. I don't know if she had triplets at some point or what, but regardless, the number of children she had didn't matter. And so it's really just, calling those things out. And as Black journalists too, we have to, and I'll make this really quick point, when you are telling a story about us, you have to, in your mind, understand that the words that you are saying sometimes is in a language that stereotypes us. There was another story where a white man grabbed a girl at McDonald's and he pulled her over and they started fighting. And the headline was, McDonald's employee and man get into a fight. No, the story is a man attacked a Black McDonald's employee that led to the fight. You know what I mean? Don't make it sound like they just started fighting, because he attacked this woman and pulled her over the counter. So when you're telling these stories, you have to, in your mind, think, okay, let me tell, it's kind of hard to explain, but you kind of get what I'm saying. Like, you have to say, no, they didn't get into a fight. He attacked her. And in your script and in your packages, in your story, you keep saying, he attacked, not they got into a fight. That's a difference.
It's like flipping the code switch.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I sort of feel like Michael Bloomberg and Stop and Frisk, an apology is too little too late, I think, here. And as a founder of the organization, I have to say that to everybody here, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we didn't do what we were supposed to do. I'm sorry we promised the generation behind us that it would be better for them, that it would be better for you. And I'm sorry about that. Ernest, you said something that resonated, and this is my last comment. And I worked at NBC News with two people. One was my researcher, one was a colleague, a producing colleague. And both are now presidents of their cable news stations. There were teachable moments when I worked with them. And I didn't teach them. And so I think what you were saying and what I hear everybody saying is we now all have a responsibility to teach, to figure out what those teaching moments are, and to really make sure, and I'm sick to have to say this, that the next generation doesn't have to go through what I went through, with the generation a little bit above you, and that what you're going through now. So for everybody, I apologize.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to move into our next panel. I do want to say that there's a room across the hallway. So if any of the panelists want to go there and you have questions for those panelists, you can also do the Q&A in there. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, but please give our panel